I always arrive at the Apex Capital office at 5:30 in the morning. The security guard Ted has even stopped asking for my pass. He just nods and goes back to his crossword puzzle. The building is still dark and quiet. Only the cleaning lady, Maria, is wiping down the glass partitions on the first floor, and we exchange the customary "good morning" in two different languages. The elevator takes me up to the 27th floor. I only turn on the lights in my small office in the far corner of the open space. No one will see that light from the street. My windows face the blank wall of the neighboring building, a perfect metaphor for my career. My name is Lance Corey, and I am the ghost of Boston's financial world, a man who creates billion-dollar deals that no one suspects exist. I take a thermos of coffee out of my briefcase, turn on my computer, and unfold the Gulf Sierra project papers on my desk. $950 million, the largest deal in the history of Apex Capital, a contract I've been building up piece by piece for the last 7 months. At 6:15, I'm already deep into financial models when my phone vibrates with a message. The rate terms have changed. Gulf Sierra Council wants a fixed 4 2/10 instead of floating. Recalculate everything by 9 in the morning. Slade. No please or good morning. Just an order from a man who woke up with the idea of ruining my day. Warren Slade, CEO of Apex Capital. My boss and a man who has built a career on other people's ideas, mostly mine. I take a sip of cold coffee and open a new spreadsheet. Changing the rate means recalculating the entire payment structure, reassessing risks, and adjusting insurance instruments. 3 hours of work at best. It would take a normal analyst an entire day. But I'm no ordinary analyst. My fingers fly across the keyboard. The numbers add up in my head faster than a computer can process them. I've always been like that. The numbers just talk to me. In college, professors called it math intuition. For me, it's like breathing. By 8:30, the office begins to fill with people. The smell of expensive perfume, the noise of the coffee machine, scraps of conversation about the weekend and sporting events. No one peeks into my corner. I continue to work, invisible in my gray suit bought at a chain store 6 years ago. "Hey Corey, you're already here." Brian Foster, Associate Vice President of Development, stops by my desk. He's tall, tan, with a white-hot smile and an MBA from Harvard. "Listen, I need your help with a presentation for the Middletons. Will you throw me a look?" It's not a question. It's never a question. "I have a question, Brian. Slade wants a recount by 9. Come on. You're the genius of these things. Look, it's just a couple slides." He puts a flash drive on my desk. "Can you make it by lunch?" I nod, even though I know a couple slides will turn out to be a 30-page presentation with every formula wrong. Brian claps me on the shoulder and leaves without waiting for an answer. At 9:05, I send the updated model to Slade and tackle Brian's presentation. As I suspected, it's a mess. Foster didn't even bother to check the basic calculations. The phone vibrates again. "Come in. S. 1 letter. I don't even deserve a full name." Slade's office occupies a corner of a building with panoramic windows overlooking the river and the city. The owner of the office himself sits behind a mahogany desk, reviewing my calculations on the screen. "Corey." He doesn't even lift his head. "Are these numbers correct?" "Yeah." I double-checked them 3 times. "Are you sure? Because if we sign a contract with these numbers and then it turns out something doesn't add up." "That's right, Mr. Slade." I stand with my hands behind my back, twirling the pencil discreetly between my fingers, my nervous habit. With a fixed rate, we lose about $17 million in potential profits, but we're insured against potential fluctuations in the event of a recession. Slade finally looks at me. His eyes are as cold and gray as a New England November sky. "Okay, get everything ready for the presentation to the board, and make me some key number cards. I don't want to get into details, just the key numbers." When's the presentation? In 2 hours. And Corey, make it pretty. None of your 10-digit decimal tables. The board needs simple, easy-to-understand graphs. Of course, Mr. Slade. As I'm leaving the office, I run into Meredith Paxton, our CFO, the only person in the company who knows my true worth. Lance, she smiles, and her bright red lipstick seems inappropriately bright among the gray suits of the office. How's the Gulf Sierra? Changing to a flat rate. Meredith frowns. Really? That's a loss. She does a quick math in her head. 17.3 million, I finish for her. Shit. Is that the board's decision? Slade. She shakes her head. Come see me after the presentation, okay? I want to discuss something. I nod and head back to my desk, where a presentation for Slade, a running paper for Brian, and 3 new emails marked urgent from other departments await me. I wasn't always like this, invisible, a ghost. There was a time when I dreamed bigger. 12 years ago, when I joined Apex Capital, I thought the world of finance was open to me. A young analyst with a math degree from MIT, I thought I could be a game changer. I had ideas, energy, and naivete multiplied by a real talent for numbers. My first mistake was to propose a new risk assessment model at a general meeting. The model was innovative. It took into account factors that traditional methods ignored. I spent 3 months developing it, tested it on historical data. It worked flawlessly. Slade, then a vice president, made fun of me in front of everyone. Corey thinks he can teach us how to work, he said, prompting laughter in the conference room. Thanks for the enthusiasm, but let's leave innovation to those who know how to do it. 6 months later, he presented a revolutionary methodology for analyzing Slade. My model. Word for word, formula for formula. He got a promotion and a bonus. And I learned a lesson. The second blow was the divorce. Allison, my wife, just couldn't stand my work. You're like a robot, Lance, she said as she packed her things. You come home and keep counting in your head. You're here, but you're not. She'd gone to a successful realtor with his own firm, to a man who knew how to sell not only homes, but himself, the complete opposite of me. By the time I was 35, I finally understood my role in the world. I'm the engine hidden under the hood. No one applauds the carburetor when the car comes in first. I've accepted it. I went into the shadows, and it was in the shadows that I became truly valuable. Damn, Corey, you saved my ass. Brian returns to my desk at 5 p.m., when most of his colleagues are already going home. The Middletons are excited about the presentation. Glad to help. We'll have to grab a drink after work sometime. I never see you at the bar with the guys. We both know that's an empty sentence. In the 7 years Brian's worked here, he's never once asked me out for drinks with the boys, and he never will. Maybe, I say, returning to my calculations. At 6:30, the office is empty. I go to Meredith's office as promised. Her office is smaller than Slade's, but much cozier. There are antique clocks everywhere, her passion. The ticking of dozens of mechanisms creates a strange atmosphere, as if you were inside a giant time machine. Come on in, Meredith smiles, taking off her reading glasses. Did you see Slade's presentation? No, I had a lot of work to do. He used your slides, every single one, even read your notes as his own. I shrug. It's nothing new. Lance. Meredith looks at me with an expression that's a mixture of pity and annoyance. Do you realize that this deal is going to make the company a lot of money? And do you know what kind of bonus Slade's getting? I don't know, and I don't want to know. Is there anything specific you wanted to discuss? Meredith sighs. Destin Hall called me today. I freeze. Destin Hall is the head of Rivera Investments, a competitor of Apex Capital. Why? Asked about you. Again. He's offering you a department head position at his company. I don't say anything, staring at the antique clock on the wall. 18th century, judging by the movement. Lance, that's the 4th offer in 2 years. Why are you turning it down? The words are sticking in my throat. How do I explain to her that I'm not sure if I can be a leader after all these years of being invisible? I need to think about it. Okay, Meredith nods. But don't take too long. Offers like this don't wait forever. I go back to my desk, gather my papers, and turn off my computer. The building is almost empty. Only Slade's office light is on. As I walk by, I see him talking on the phone. He's laughing, leaning back in his chair. Yes, George, we did it. $950 million. My best contract ever. Of course, I calculated everything personally. No complications. I had everything under control. I stop, listening to him take credit for 7 months of my work. Sleepless nights, missed weekends, thousands of lines of calculations and models. At that moment, something inside me snaps, quietly, almost inaudible, like clockwork getting ready to strike the hour. I walk home in the thickening dusk, and for the first time in years there are no numbers in my head, just silence and a strange, unfamiliar feeling. It seems to be anger. For 3 days before signing the contract with Gulf Sierra, I hardly left the office. Every detail of the $950 million contract had to be perfect. Every comma, every number, every legal wording. It was snowing wet in Boston. I watched it from the window while the printer produced the last version of the agreement, 386 pages of legal text, financial calculations, and appendices. Sweat dripped down my back despite the cold air conditioning. 5 months of work was turning into reality. I thumbed through the pages, checking every section. The repayment structure, guarantees, insurance arrangements, termination terms. 7 different repayment schedules depending on market fluctuations. Everything I'd made myself, from the first line to the last. My invisible creation. You look like crap, Corey. Meredith stopped by my desk with 2 glasses of coffee. Brought you some fuel. Thanks. I took the hot glass. Final edits. I want to make sure it's perfect. Warren's shining like a Christmas tree. She sat down on the edge of the table. Already ordered champagne for tomorrow's signing. Perfect. I sipped my coffee. Hot and strong. Just what I needed. Do you think there'll be a problem tomorrow? Meredith shook her head. Gulf Sierra is fully on board. Their CFO called me yesterday, said the board unanimously approved the contract. You did an incredible job, Lance. I didn't say anything. We both knew that tomorrow the applause will not be for me. How was Hall's proposal? She asked, lowering her voice and looking away. I'm still thinking. Lance, Meredith looked at me with an unaccustomed seriousness. I know you're afraid of change, but sometimes you have to take a step into the unknown. I remained silent again, turning back to the paperwork. Hall's offer was tempting, too tempting to be true. There had to be a catch. Don't stay up until morning, Meredith stood up. Tomorrow's a big day. You need at least some sleep. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the papers. Meredith left, leaving behind a light scent of expensive perfume and the taste of unspoken words. I went home that night. I showered, changed into a fresh shirt, and even slept for 4 hours. In the morning, looking in the mirror, I saw a tired, middle-aged man with dark circles under his eyes and thinning hair. I was 42, but I looked older. The price of invisibility. I arrived at the office at 6 in the morning. The security guard, Ted, nodded at me, habitually not asking for a pass. I went up to my floor, turned on the lights and my computer. My ritual hadn't changed in years. The final contract check took another 2 hours. By 8:30, the document was ready, and I took it to the legal department for one last formal proofreading. Good morning, Lance. Jennifer, the head of legal, greeted me. Is this it, the grand bargain? That's it. I placed the stack of papers on her desk. Everything checks out, but I'd appreciate it if you'd take another look at the sections on international transactions. There are a couple of nuances with Swiss banks. Sure, she smiled. Slade had already asked about the paperwork 3 times this morning. Excited, I shrugged. More like anticipating his bonus. Jennifer lowered her voice. I nodded, showing no emotion. For years I'd convinced myself that money wasn't important, that I'd do my job for the sake of the job, that it was enough for me to realize its value. But in that moment, hearing about Slade's bonus, I felt something bitter inside. By 9 o'clock, the office was filled with people. Everyone was talking about the contract. There was a sense of celebration and collective accomplishment in the air, as if every employee had contributed to the deal. No one noticed me, as usual. At 10:15, Jennifer returned the documents to me with a few minor edits. By 11, I had the final version ready for signing. The Gulf Sierra representatives were scheduled to arrive by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I was sitting at my desk, looking at a thick folder with the contract when Carol, Slade's secretary, approached me. "Mr. Corey." Her voice was professionally neutral. "Mr. Slade asked me to give you this." She placed a white envelope on my desk. Without waiting for a response, Carol turned and walked away, heels clacking on the polished floor. I looked at the envelope, a plain office envelope with no writing on it. Something inside me clenched, as if I already knew what was in it. Slowly, controlling every movement, I opened it and pulled out a doubled folded piece of paper, a standard Apex Capital letterhead. Notice of termination of employment. You are hereby informed that Apex Capital is terminating the employment contract of you, Lance Corey, pursuant to paragraph 7.3 of the employment contract, effective 15 hours 00 minutes today. Please surrender your badge, keys, and all corporate property by that time. Compensation and settlement will be made in accordance with company policy. Sincerely, Apex Capital Human Resources. No explanation of the reasons, not even handwritten, a standard template with the date and name typed in. I reread the note 3 times, not believing my eyes. I was being fired the day I signed a contract I'd been working on for months, an hour before the Gulf Sierra delegation arrived. My throat was dry, my hands were damp, and the pencil I'd been twirling between my fingers broke, leaving a black streak in the palm of my hand. I stood up, still holding the note. There was work going on all around, people walking, talking, typing. No one noticed the man with the white sheet in his hand. No one saw the world collapsing around him. Staggering, as if in a trance, I headed toward Slade's office. Carol tried to stop me, saying the boss had an important call, but I walked past without even looking at her. Slade was indeed on the phone, reclining in his leather chair. When he saw me, he frowned, but didn't interrupt the conversation. I stood in front of him, holding the note in plain sight. There was an emptiness inside me that I had never felt before. "Yeah, I'll be sure to say hi to my wife." Slade finally ended the conversation. "What do you want, Corey? I'm busy." "This," I put the note on his desk. "What does it mean?" Slade didn't even look at the paper. "What does it look like? You're fired. As of 3 o'clock this afternoon. After you sign the contract, you can pack your bags." "Why?" My voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. Slade sighed, clearly annoyed at having to explain the obvious. "Cost-cutting, Corey. It's nothing personal. The board of directors wants to optimize the budget and your position. Let's just say it's not the most necessary." "Not the most necessary?" I felt a strange laughter building inside of me. "I created this contract, from the first letter to the last. 7 months of work. And the company paid your salary for it," Slade shrugged. "I don't see what the problem is. The contract is done. The deal will be closed today. Your job is done. Who's going to do the implementation, tracking payments, adjusting the schedules?" "We have other analysts." He waved his hand. "Don't be so dramatic, Corey. It's business, nothing personal." I stared at him, not believing my ears. In 12 years, I'd gotten used to being ignored, to having my merits taken credit for by others. But that was a new level of cynicism even for Warren Slade. "You don't realize how complicated this contract is," I said quietly. "You can't properly service it without me." "Don't flatter yourself," Slade gritted his teeth. "No one is irreplaceable, especially—" He hesitated, but I could see what he was trying to say. "Especially who?" I looked him straight in the eye for the first time. "Especially invisible people like me." He shrugged awkwardly. "Look, if you need a reference for your next job, I'll write one. I'll say you're competent, but the decision's been made. And yes," he glanced at his watch, "I have to get ready for a meeting with Gulf Sierra, so—" He made a hand gesture toward the door. Our conversation was over. I stood in front of him for a few more seconds, feeling something finally tearing inside. 12 years of work, and just like that, a note and a 5-minute conversation. "Go home, Corey." Slade wasn't looking at me anymore, staring down at the paperwork. "Human Resources will contact you about the severance package." I walked silently out of his office. Carol was careful to pretend she hadn't heard the conversation. Meredith caught up with me in the hallway. "Lance, what's going on? Are you okay?" She put her hand on my shoulder. "You're white as chalk." "I got fired," I said, still not believing what was happening. "What?" Meredith froze. "When? When? Why?" "Today. After I signed the contract. Cost-cutting." "This is some kind of mistake," she shook her head. "I'll talk to Slade." "Don't," I stopped her. "Don't, Meredith, it's okay. Nothing is fine. They can't just—" "They can," I smiled weakly. "They can, and they just did." We reached my desk. I sank into the chair feeling strangely calm, like part of me had already died and the rest of me was watching from the sidelines. "What are you going to do?" Meredith asked, sitting down next to me. "I'm going to pack, go home. And then?" I shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe I'll call Hall." She nodded, looking at me worriedly. "Is there anything I can do to help?" "No," I shook my head. "I need to finish some things before I go." "Shouldn't you be at the signing?" Slade didn't mention it. I guess not. Meredith pressed her lips together. "I hate this company sometimes." "Only sometimes?" I tried to make a joke, but it was lame. She gave me a quick, friendly hug and walked away, leaving me alone. I sat at my desk, staring at the blank computer screen. There was an emptiness inside, but in a strange way that emptiness was beginning to be filled with something new, something dark and cold that had never before been a part of me. A plan began to form in my head, not consciously, as if some other part of my mind was working separately from me, calculating options, assessing risks, sequencing actions. I slowly opened a desk drawer and took out a flash drive, which stored backup copies of all my calculations on the contract Gulf Sierra. I put it in my pocket. Then I turned on my computer and began methodically deleting files I didn't want to leave to the company. Not corporate documents. My personal designs, models I'd been building for years. They belonged to me, not Apex Capital. I then opened the safe under my desk and pulled out a folder of printouts, the ones that didn't appear in the official documents, my drafts, notes, alternative calculations. I put them in my briefcase. All the while, a plan continued to form in my head, crystallizing, fleshing out the details. A plan that yesterday would have seemed insane to me. Today it seemed the only logical choice. At 1:30, the office began to bustle. The Gulf Sierra delegation was arriving. People in suits were scurrying back and forth. Someone was setting up water bottles in the conference room. Secretaries were checking to see if everything was ready for the signing ceremony. I sat motionless, looking at what was happening with a strange detachment. It was like watching a movie about someone else's life. At 2 o'clock, Carol came to my desk. "Mr. Corey, Mr. Slade wants me to bring the contract to the main conference room." I nodded, picked up the file folder, and followed her. In the conference room already gathered representatives of Gulf Sierra, 5 men and 2 women in dark suits. Slade and our top managers greeted them, exchanging handshakes and fake smiles. I placed the folder on the table in front of Slade and silently stepped aside. No one even noticed me. I was a ghost at my own funeral. "Gentlemen, ladies," Slade began his speech, "today is a historic day for both of our companies." I walked out of the room before I finished. I went back to my desk and began to gather my personal belongings. They were surprisingly few: a few books, a mug, a picture of my parents. 12 years of my life fit into one small cardboard box. In my head, the plan took final shape. Clear, cold, ruthless. The plan of a man with nothing to lose. I looked at my watch. 2 hours and 30 minutes. I had half an hour before I was officially fired. Enough time to change my life forever. I pulled one of the folders out of my briefcase and opened it. Inside was a copy of the last page of the contract, the one with the bank details for the transfer of funds. I sat in my chair, looking at the picture of my parents, the only personal item I'd never put away in the box. My dad in a shirt with his sleeves rolled up, my mom with her unchanging smile. They died 3 years apart when I was already working at Apex Capital. Simple people who always told me to be honest. I wonder what they would say now. Behind the glass walls of the conference room, the signing ceremony continued. Slade was giving his speech, displaying his trademark smile of a shark smelling blood. Gulf Sierra representatives nodded, impressed by his eloquence. Perfect timing for a historic deal. I put the picture in the box and closed it. The plan in my head was complete, clear as a mathematical formula. Now all that remained was to execute it, step by step, variable by variable. Step 1. Stay in the office after being fired. It seemed impossible. I was fired. My badge should be deactivated at 1500. But Apex Capital's security system had one major flaw. It was set up by people who didn't notice people like me. 5 years ago, the IT department was upgrading the access control systems. I was asked to analyze the costs of the project. In reviewing the documentation, I discovered an interesting feature. When an employee's badge was deactivated, the system did not immediately lock them out. There was a window of 12 hours when the servers would update the database. This usually occurred at 3 in the morning, the time of lowest load. No one paid attention to this nuance. No one except me, the invisible guy who read documentation instead of having lunch with coworkers. So until 3 a.m., my pass will work. Step 2. Prepare a new identity. This is something I started doing years ago, just out of interest. Not because I was planning a crime, just curious to imagine what I might be like under different circumstances. The internet is full of guides on how to create an alternate personality. Most of them are written by paranoid people and are only good for movies, but some of the ideas were reasonable. I rented a mailbox in New Hampshire in the name of Nate Brannick, a character from a book I read in college. I was even able to forge a passport in that name. Also, out of interest, can I do that? Used it to register a company, a consulting firm called Northern Analytics, a small startup providing financial analysis services. I set up an account for the company at a local bank. Then, using that account as proof of business, incorporated in Delaware. From there, the connection led to an offshore company in the Cayman Islands and from there to a Swiss bank account. A chain of custody that would take even a seasoned investigator months to traverse. For me, it was a game. Until today. I looked up from my desk. The signing was over. Handshakes, smiles, photos for the press release. Slade and the CEO of Gulf Sierra held the contract folder, posing for the corporate photographer. A contract I created. A contract I'm about to change. Step 3. Wait for the office to empty. After the ceremony, the party began. Champagne, hors d'oeuvre, laughter. A celebration of success to which, of course, I wasn't invited. I sat at my desk, pretending to pack. No one paid any attention to me. Being fired made me even more invisible than usual. At 15:30, Meredith came up to me. "Lance, are you still here?" She looked worried. "I thought you'd left already." "I'm just finishing up some paperwork." I pointed to a stack of papers. "I want to keep everything in order." "Even after what they did to you?" Meredith shook her head. "You're too good for this place." "Thank you," I smiled weakly. "You're the only one who's ever noticed." "Not the only one," she lowered her voice. "You just don't notice." I nodded, not commenting. "What are you going to do?" Meredith asked. "I hadn't thought about it yet," I said evasively. "I need to finish everything here first." "Don't stay out too late." She squeezed my shoulder. "And let me know if you need a recommendation. I'll write one that'll get you hired anywhere." "Thank you, Meredith." I was truly grateful. She was the only person at Apex Capital who saw me as more than a walking calculator. For everything. She gave me one last smile and walked away, leaving me alone in my corner. The party went on until 6 p.m. Then people started to leave. By 7, there were only a few people left in the office, mostly workaholics from legal and marketing. By 8 p.m., I was completely on my own. Step 4. Get access to the original contract. This was the hardest part of the plan. Once signed, the document was to be placed in the legal department's safe, from where it would be transferred to the bank tomorrow to begin transactions. But the legal department was on the 29th floor, and I had no access to it. There was no way around this problem directly. However, I didn't need the whole contract. Just the last page, the one with the details for the transfer of funds, and I knew exactly where to find a copy of it. Slade had a habit of keeping important documents in his personal safe, not originals, copies, so he'd always have them handy. I'd seen him take a copy of the contract into his office after signing it. I didn't have access to Slade's safe either, but there was another way. A year ago, the IT department had installed a new backup system. All important documents were automatically scanned and uploaded to a secure server. Only the IT director and his deputies had access to the server, and one discreet financial analyst who helped customize the system's security settings. I turned on my computer and logged into my account, started a command prompt, entered a series of commands, bypassing the standard security protocols. 5 minutes later, I was inside the backup system. Finding a scanned copy of the contract was easy. The last document uploaded labeled Priority. I opened the file. 386 pages of legal text. I scrolled to the end, to the page with the bank details. There it was, the page that would change everything. Step 5. Modify the details. I copied the page into a new document. The format was exactly the same. The font, the indents, even the microscopic Apex Capital logo in the bottom corner. Now, the most important thing, the bank details. The original contract called for funds to be transferred to Apex Capital's corporate account at Goldman Sachs. $950 million in one payment, the largest transaction in the company's history. I opened a new file on my encrypted flash drive. The details of my Swiss account, an account that had no direct connection to my name. Transferred the data to a modified page. Account number, SWIFT code, bank name. Everything looked identical to the original, except for these critical details. Done. The new page was indistinguishable from the original. Even an expert wouldn't have noticed the difference without directly comparing the numbers. I printed the modified page on special paper, exactly the same paper used for the contract. Another advantage of being invisible. I knew where I kept a supply of expensive paper for important documents. Step 6. Substitute a page in the original contract. I looked at my watch. 9:30 in the evening. By now, only security and a couple of night janitors were supposed to be left in the building. Shutting down the computer, I stashed the modified page in a folder and walked out of my office. The corridors of Apex Capital were empty and dimly lit by emergency lights. I moved quietly, trying to avoid the security cameras. I knew their locations by heart, another advantage of a man who notices details. The legal department was 2 floors up. To get there, I had to use my security pass. Critical point. If the system had already updated, the pass wouldn't work and my plan would fail. I swiped my card on the reader. A second of waiting seemed like an eternity. Green light. The door opened. Reaching the 29th floor, I stepped carefully out of the elevator. The legal department was plunged into darkness. Only the duty lights and the red lights of the cameras. I knew where the safe with the important documents was. Behind Jennifer's office, in a small, windowless room. The door to that room was locked with an electronic lock that only the legal staff knew the code to. But they weren't the only ones. 2 years ago, there had been a leak of confidential information. One of the junior associates was suspected. I was asked to analyze the access logs to the document vault. In the process, I recognized the code, 24719. As far as I knew, it hadn't been changed since then. I went to the door and entered the code. The lock clicked. I was inside. The safe was against the far wall. Big, heavy, with a digital lock. I couldn't open it, but I didn't need to. Next to the safe was a desk for working with documents. On it was a folder with a copy of the contract, the document that had been signed today. Not the original, but an identical copy that was to be sent to Gulf Sierra tomorrow. I opened the folder. There it was, 386 pages of legal genius. My genius. Carefully, I took out the last page and replaced it with a modified version. I closed the folder and put it back exactly as it had been before. Now the hardest part remained, replacing the page in the original. I knew I couldn't open the safe, but there was an alternative. Step 7. Access the original through Slade's office. I walked out of the document vault, closing the door carefully behind me, and headed for the elevator. I went down to the 27th floor and went to Slade's office. His office was closed, but not locked. Typical of Slade, he believed that no one dared enter his sanctuary without permission. I quietly opened the door and slipped inside. The study was in semi-darkness, with only the light of the city outside the window to create bizarre shadows. Slade's personal safe was behind a painting, trivial but effective. An old-fashioned safe with a mechanical lock, which he preferred to its modern electronic counterpart. I didn't know the combination, but I knew where Slade kept it. His day planner, a leather-bound book that always lay in the top drawer of his desk. Slade was paranoid about technology and didn't trust digital records. He wrote down all the important things by hand. I opened the drawer and pulled out the day planner. I flipped to the last page, where the important numbers were usually kept. There it was, a combination disguised as his first wife's birthday, 12/05/83. I walked over to the safe, pulled back the picture, and started spinning the disc. The lock clicked and the door opened. Inside were several folders, a wad of cash, and a small cufflink box. I took the top folder. It was signed Gulf Sierra, Original. I opened it, made sure it was indeed the original contract with stamps and signatures. Carefully took out the last page and replaced it with another modified copy, which prepared in advance. Returned the folder to the safe, closed it, and set the disc in a random position. Hung the painting back up. Put the day planner back in the desk drawer and closed it. Mission accomplished. I was already heading for the door when I heard footsteps in the hallway, heavy, slow. A guard making his evening rounds. I froze, huddled against the wall by the door. The footsteps were getting closer, stopped right in front of the office. I wasn't breathing. If the guard came in and saw me here, it was over. The doorknob turned. The door started to open. I pressed myself into the wall behind the door, trying to blend into the shadows. A flashlight beam slid across the office. The guard illuminated the desk, the chair, the windows. "Strange," he muttered. He could have sworn he'd seen a light in here. He shone the flashlight into the room again and closed the door. Footsteps drifted down the hall. I exhaled. Sweat dripped down my back, my shirt clinging to my body. Close. Too close. After waiting 5 minutes, I cautiously peered out into the hallway. It was empty. I took a quick step back to my desk, grabbed my box of stuff, and headed for the exit. The pass was still working. I was able to exit the building unimpeded. It was raining outside. I pulled up my coat collar and walked to the cab stop. My work at Apex Capital was done. Sitting in the back seat of the cab, I looked out over Boston at night. The city I had lived in for most of my adult life. A city I would soon have to leave. But not empty-handed. Tomorrow morning, Gulf Sierra will transfer $950 million, and that money won't be going into the Apex Capital account. It's going into an account controlled by Nate Brannick, a man who doesn't exist, a man who would soon be me. At home, I opened my laptop and checked the status of my preparations. Plane tickets to Toronto are in Nate Brannick's name. From there to Zurich. A rented apartment awaits me in a suburb of Geneva. New papers ready, not perfect, but good enough to cross the border. Everything was ready. I sat back in my chair and for the first time all day allowed myself to realize the magnitude of what I had done. I had stolen almost $1 billion, a crime that carries a life sentence. But strangely, I felt no guilt, just cold determination and relief. For 12 years I'd been nothing, invisible, a man used and discarded. Tomorrow I'll be someone else, a man with a future, with possibilities, with enough money to last 10 lifetimes. I set my alarm for 6 in the morning. The flight to Toronto left at 10. The transaction should be done by then. I checked all the details of the plan one last time. Everything was perfect. As I fell asleep, I thought about Slade's face when he found out what had happened. It was worth it. Even if I got caught, that look on his face would be worth everything. But I won't get caught. I've thought this through too well. I woke up at 5:30, half an hour before my alarm clock. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and mentally going over the details of the plan. It had to work perfectly, and it would. I got up, showered, shaved more thoroughly than usual, wore his best suit, a navy blue one he'd bought 3 years ago on sale. It wasn't from a famous designer, but it fit well. I had to look flawless today. For the last time. My suitcase was packed yesterday. A passport in the name of Nate Brannick was in the inside pocket of my jacket, along with my boarding pass for the flight to Toronto. A laptop, encrypted flash drive, and phone. Everything I needed to monitor the transaction in my briefcase. In the kitchen, I brewed myself some coffee and looked out the window. Boston was waking up. The sky was brightening in the east. An ordinary morning in a city that would soon be in my past. At 6:30, I left the house and hailed a cab. I could have gone straight to the airport, but that would have been a mistake. If anything went wrong, the police would check the airport cameras first. No, I had to show up at the office, play my part to the fullest. "Good morning, Ted," I said. Hello to the security guard in the lobby of Apex Capital. He raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Mr. Corey? I thought you quit yesterday." "Quit? Yeah," I nodded. "I need to get the last of my things and hand over the files. Formalities." Ted nodded understandingly and let me through. Typical carelessness, which would play to my advantage today. The office was still empty when I got to my floor. Just a couple of workaholics from accounting and a cleaning lady wiping down the glass partitions. No one paid any attention to me an ordinary morning, an ordinary Lance Corey coming in before everyone else. I sat down at my desk and turned on my computer. Access was still working, another carelessness. Checked my email. Opened a chat channel set up on an encrypted server. Through it, I could monitor the activity of my Swiss account. So far, everything was quiet. By 8 o'clock, the office began to fill with people. No one seemed surprised by my presence. Probably the rumor of my dismissal hadn't spread widely yet. Or maybe they just didn't care. At 8:15, Slade arrived. He walked past my desk without even a glance. He was followed by two assistants carrying his favorite coffee and fresh newspapers. At 8:30, Meredith arrived. When she saw me, her face changed and she came right over. "Lance, what are you doing here?" She sounded genuinely concerned. "I was picking up the last of my things," I pointed to the box on the table, "and I wanted to see the finale." "The finale?" She frowned. "The transaction. I wanted to make sure everything went smoothly." Meredith looked at me questioningly. "Are you okay? You look different." "I just made a decision." I smiled. "Of course." She squeezed my shoulder. "I have to run to a meeting, but let's talk later. How about lunch? We'll see how the day goes." I nodded. Meredith walked away, but I sensed she wasn't completely satisfied with my answers. Smart woman. Too smart. At 9 o'clock, the hustle and bustle began. The Gulf Sierra delegation was arriving for final signatures and initiation of payment. This time, the CEO himself arrived, Robert Hampton, a heavy-set man with gray hair and a tenacious gaze. They were met in the main conference room on the 29th floor. I went up there trying to keep a low profile. No one stopped me. I was still an employee in the system, though fired. The conference room was festively decorated. Bouquets of flowers, mineral water in crystal decanters, corporate flags of Apex Capital and Gulf Sierra on the table. A photographer was setting up his camera in the corner. I took a seat at the far end of the hall, almost at the very door. Ideal position. You can see everything, but you remain in the shadows. At 9:30, the hall filled up. Representatives of both companies took seats at the long table. Slade sat at the head, next to Hampton. They were discussing something animatedly, laughing like old friends. Slade's secretary, Carol, handed out folders of documents. I watched her closely. I wondered if anyone would notice the switch. At 9:45, Slade tapped his pen on the table, calling for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, today is a historic day for our companies. The contract we are signing opens a new era of cooperation between Apex Capital and Gulf Sierra." He continued to speak, extolling the benefits of the deal as if it was his idea from start to finish. No one mentioned my name. Hampton responded with an equally pathetic speech. Then they got down to the formal part. "So," Slade opened the contract folder, "everything is ready to be signed. Our lawyers checked every comma. They did, but they didn't notice. They started signing, page by page, appendix by appendix. I watched their pens glide across the paper, leaving trails of black ink, signature after signature, getting closer and closer to the last page. When they reached it, the page with the bank details, I involuntarily held my breath. Hampton was about to sign a document authorizing the transfer of $950 million into my account. He didn't even look at the details. He just put his big signature in the right place. "Congratulations, Warren," Hampton shook Slade's hand. "Great deal." "Likewise, Robert," Slade glowed. "I suggest we celebrate." The photographers began to shoot the moment of the handshake. I carefully stood up and headed for the exit. My work here was done. On my way to the elevator, I noticed Meredith coming out of her office. "Lance," she called out to me. "How'd it go?" "Perfect." I couldn't help but smile. "It's all signed." "So what now?" She looked at the box in my hands. "You're leaving?" "Yes. I think my time here is over." She frowned. "You seem a little strange today. Are you sure you're okay?" "Absolutely," I nodded. "It's just a new chapter in my life." "Okay." She still looked worried. "Call me tonight? I want to make sure you're okay." "I will." I lied with an ease I'd never experienced before. We parted at the elevator. I went down to my floor for the last time. I sat down at my computer and ran a special program that simulated a system crash, a little Trojan I'd created months ago, just in case. The program worked perfectly. The screen blinked on and off. Perfect cover. If anyone tried to check what I'd been doing the last few days, they'd stumble upon an accidental system crash. I'd signed the paperwork at HR and turned in my badge as early as yesterday, so there was nothing more for me to do at the company. As I walked out of the building, I looked around. Across from the office was a small cafe, the Bluebird, where I sometimes ate lunch. The perfect place for the next step. I crossed the street, entered the cafe, and took a table by the window. There was a great view of the Apex Capitol building. I ordered a coffee and a sandwich, took out my laptop, and connected to the secure network. Now I just had to wait. According to the contract, Gulf Sierra was supposed to initiate payment as soon as the documents were signed. Given the bank's processing time, the money should have arrived in about an hour. I drank coffee in small sips, watching the laptop screen. The usual life of the cafe was bustling around. Customers were coming and going. The barista was preparing drinks, and soft music was playing. It was a strange feeling, sitting here among ordinary people, knowing that in an hour I would be the owner of almost $1 billion, a stolen billion. At 11:25, my phone vibrated. A message from Meredith. "Lance, we need to talk. There's something weird with the details in the contract. Call me urgently." I stared at the screen, feeling my heart start to beat faster. They'd discovered the switch sooner than I'd expected, but it was too late, too late. At that moment, the laptop screen flickered. A notification of an incoming transaction appeared. $950 million. The transaction was complete. I took a deep breath. It worked. It really worked. The phone vibrated again. This time, an incoming call from Meredith. I didn't answer it. Another call. And another. Then the message, "Lance, this is serious. The contract has the wrong details. Slade is pissed. Where are you?" I finished my coffee, closed my laptop, and paid cash. I turned my phone off and left it on the table. Walking out of the cafe, I took one last look at the Apex Capitol building. Through the windows of the upper floors, I could imagine the hustle and bustle that was about to begin. The calls, the yelling, the accusations. Slade's face changing as he realized the magnitude of what had happened. I smiled and hailed a cab. "To the airport, please." It was a little over an hour until my flight. Perfect timing. Not too early to arouse suspicion, but not too close. In the cab, I checked the news on my tablet. Nothing yet about a major theft or trouble at Apex Capitol, but there would be soon, very soon. Logan Airport was full of people. I checked in with no problems. Nate Brannick's passport looked completely authentic. I checked my luggage, got my boarding pass. In the waiting area, I bought a newspaper and sat by the window, watching the planes take off. A strange calmness swept over me. I had done it. I really did. The phone I had bought yesterday, especially for this occasion, vibrated. A message from a bank in Switzerland confirming the funds had arrived. I sent a pre-prepared reply. Instructions to distribute the money to several accounts in different countries. Some would stay in Switzerland. Some would go to the Cayman Islands, some to Singapore. A route almost impossible to trace. At 12:15, boarding for my flight began. I stood up, grabbed my carry-on, and headed for the gate. At that moment, I saw them two men in dark suits walking quickly through the lounge. They were scanning the faces of the passengers, obviously looking for someone. Me? I slowed down, trying not to show my anxiety, turned toward the restrooms as if I needed to go in there before boarding. The men walked past without paying attention to me. They were looking for someone else. I exhaled and went back to the boarding line. Paranoia. It's natural in my position. On the plane, I took my window seat and buckled in. Only now did I feel how tense every muscle in my body was. The adrenaline that had kept me going for the past 24 hours was finally starting to wear off. The plane began to taxi onto the runway. I stared out the window at the distant Boston, the city in which I was a nobody, the city I was leaving as a billionaire. My phone was left in the cafe, but I could imagine what was going on there now. Dozens of missed calls from Meredith, probably from the police by now, definitely from Slade when he realized who was behind the disappearance of the money. But it was too late. I was airborne, heading for a new life. In an hour, I'd be in Toronto, and from there, straight to Zurich. By then, the trail would be completely cold. I closed my eyes, letting the fatigue take over. For the first time in months, I could truly relax. And then I remembered Meredith, the only person at Apex Capital who saw me as more than just a tool, the only person who treated me like a human being. She didn't deserve what was happening right now. She didn't deserve to be questioned, suspected, maybe even charged with complicity. I pulled a pen and notepad from my jacket pocket. Wrote a short note. "Don't come looking for me. Forget you knew. I'm fine. Thanks for everything. L." When we land in Toronto, I'll send this from the local post office. A small risk, but I had to do it. The plane gained altitude. Clouds spread out below, hiding the ground. I was between worlds, no longer Lance Corey, not quite Nate Brannick yet, a man in transition. The flight attendant offered drinks. I ordered a whiskey on the rocks, a small celebration. The first sip burned my throat, spreading warmth through my body. $950 million, a sum I couldn't even truly comprehend, money that would change everything. I opened the magazine, pretending to read, but my thoughts were far away. They were back to the Apex Capital office, where chaos must be reigning right now. I imagined Slade's face when he found out the money was gone. His rage, his disbelief, his panic. The man who'd always thought he was the smartest man in the room had been played for a fool. I took another sip of whiskey and allowed myself a genuine smile. For the first time in years. In that moment, I didn't care what happened next. All that mattered was that I had finally taken control of my life, and no one would ever be able to make me invisible again. Outside, the clouds were endless. Somewhere down there in Boston, Meredith was trying to reach me. Maybe she'd already figured out what had happened. Maybe she'd already told Slade or the police. But I was out of reach, flying toward a new life, leaving behind everything I'd been before. Lance Corey died. Nate Brannick was born, a man with nearly $1 billion in his bank accounts and a whole world of opportunity ahead of him. I took one last sip of whiskey and closed my eyes. There was a long road ahead, and I needed to rest. The invisible man finally stepped out of the shadows. I looked up at the blue Toronto sky through the large airport windows. The first leg was complete. The clean air of a new country, a new life. The Canadian customs officials didn't even look at me twice. Nate Brannick, a middle-aged businessman, didn't raise any questions. A regular traveler, one of thousands passing through this airport every day. Turning on my new phone, I checked the secure news feeds. Nothing about Apex Capital yet. But it would be soon. Soon the whole world would know. Walking to the post office in the arrivals area, I sent a pre-prepared letter for Meredith. At the check-in counter for the flight to Zurich, no problem. Nate Brannick's passport passed all the checks. In the lounge, I bought a local newspaper and sat in the corner, leaving a view of the entire room behind me. My phone vibrated quietly. An encrypted message from my banker in Switzerland. Funds disbursed as instructed. Meeting confirmed. Everything is ready for your arrival. Perfect. I took a sip of coffee and mentally visualized what was happening at Apex Capital right now. Events must have been unfolding rapidly. At the very moment I was calmly drinking coffee at the Toronto airport, chaos was unfolding in Boston. Meredith was probably standing at Slade's desk, explaining for the third time what the bank had just confirmed. The money had gone into an unknown account, not into Apex Capital's corporate account. I can imagine Slade's face turning black, his fist hitting the desk, coffee splattering on his expensive suit. How is this possible? He must have been screaming. We've checked every page, every single digit. The requisites were switched, Meredith must have replied. Someone changed the last page of the contract. Find that bastard, Slade roared. Get the entire security team on alert. Check everyone who had access to the documents, and then, inevitably, where's Corey? He was in charge of drafting the contract. Meredith must have gone pale at the mention of my name. He quit yesterday. On your orders. What? Slade clearly didn't remember that. I was such an insignificant figure to him that my resignation didn't stick in his mind. Find him. Find him now. My flight was boarding. I put down the newspaper, grabbed my small suitcase, and headed for the gate. Toronto is left behind, just a transit point in my journey. On the plane, I relaxed for the first time in many hours. 8 hours to Zurich is plenty of time to get enough sleep and prepare for the next leg. The flight attendant offered champagne. Why not? I deserved this little treat. As the plane gained altitude, I thought about how Slade and his legal team are now frantically trying to figure out what happened, how they're checking every copy of the contract, comparing it to the original, which of course has also been tampered with. Apex Capital's security team is no doubt reviewing the security footage. They'll see me arriving early in the morning sitting at my desk, leaving with a box of personal items. Nothing suspicious. And then they will encounter surprising complications. My computer will suddenly malfunction. Backup files will disappear. Surveillance footage will be corrupted. Strange coincidence, isn't it? There was supposed to be an emergency committee meeting at Slade's office. Security, legal, IT. We've detected anomalies in the system, the IT chief was probably reporting. It seems someone had gained unauthorized access to the backup server. Who? Slade growled. We're trying to find out, but the trail's been covered, and there's something else. Strange. Speak up. Corey's computer is completely out of commission. Hard drive's been wiped. Looks like a virus, but a very selective one. Slade must have been starting to realize. His face paled at the realization that I'd been there all this time. The inconspicuous, quiet Lance Corey, the man he barely bothered to look at, the man he'd assigned to prepare a billion-dollar contract and fired the day before he signed it. Find him, Slade repeated, clenching his fists. Find the bastard, whatever it takes. My plane was crossing the Atlantic. I stared out the window at the vast ocean below us, as vast as my new opportunities. The flight attendant brought lunch. I ate leisurely, savoring every bite. Time was working for me now. After lunch, I pulled out my laptop and connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi via a secure VPN. Checked the news. There it was. First swallow. Trouble at Apex Capital? The company's stock plummeted after rumors of financial irregularities. Just a quick note in the financial section. Tomorrow it'll be the big story. The day after that, a national scandal. Everything was going according to plan. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. There were still 6 hours of flight time ahead of me. I could afford to rest. In Boston, events were unfolding rapidly. The police were questioning every employee of Apex Capital. The FBI was examining every bit of information about my life. They found surprisingly little. Lance Corey was a ghost, a man with no social media, no major purchases, no credit history. I lived modestly, almost ascetic. I rented a small apartment, took public transportation, ate mostly at home. Where did my money go? Nate Brannick's creation, of course. Offshore accounts, forged documents, preparing alternate airfields. But the best part was going to come when they started looking into the Gulf Sierra deal itself, digging deeper. Examine how it started, who negotiated it, on what terms. And then they'll find something I didn't plan on, something I discovered by accident while going through Slade's confidential correspondence a month ago. Slade was taking kickbacks, millions of dollars into secret accounts for agreeing to terms unfavorable to Apex Capital. He was selling out his own company's interests for personal gain. I had no intention of using that information. But now that a serious investigation is underway, it's bound to come out. It's an interesting twist, isn't it? A thief stealing from a thief. Zurich greeted me with rain. Small drops tapped on the porthole as the plane came in for a landing. Perfect weather for a man who wanted to go unnoticed. A driver with a sign that read, "Mr. Brannock," was waiting for me at the airport. Black Mercedes, leather seats, tinted windows, all the trappings of a successful businessman. "To the bank, please," I said in English with the slight accent I'd been practicing for the past few months. Nate Brannock, an American with Irish roots, spoke that way. As we drove through the neat streets of Zurich, I checked the news. The scandal was gaining momentum. Billion disappears from Apex Capital. FBI investigates biggest financial fraud of the decade. The bank was located in the old part of town, a respectable, columned building that inspired confidence and stability, just what a man with nearly $1 billion in his account needed. The meeting with the manager went smoothly. Mr. Meyer was very gracious. To him, I was just a wealthy client whose money had been deposited according to the rules of the banking system. Where did it come from? None of his business. Swiss bankers don't suffer from curiosity. "All your instructions have been carried out, Mr. Brannock," Meyer said, reviewing the documents. "The funds have been allocated to the designated accounts. The investment portfolio is set up according to your wishes." "Excellent," I nodded. "What about the other question? Real estate?" Meyer smiled. "It's all set. The papers are signed. I have the keys. The villa is all yours. It's perfect. My new home was waiting for me." After the bank, I stayed at the Bauer au Lac, one of Zurich's finest hotels. A room overlooking the lake, champagne in an ice bucket, fruit on a silver platter. I stood at the window, looking at the gray surface of the water, and thought about how quickly life changes. 3 days ago, I was an inconspicuous clerk, a hard worker who didn't even get a glance. Today, I'm a billionaire vacationing in the presidential suite. I spent only 2 days in Zurich. Formalities, signatures, translations. Meyer organized everything perfectly. A private plane ticket to Nice was bought through a reliable intermediary. From there, it was an hour's drive to my new home. The coastline of the south of France floated outside the limousine window. The azure sea, yachts, villas on the hills. My driver, a taciturn Frenchman, drove confidently along the winding roads. We passed several coastal towns and began to climb up into the mountains. The road got narrower and the views more and more picturesque. Finally, we stopped at a wrought iron gate. The driver pressed a button on the remote control and the gate opened smoothly. The driveway led to a whitewashed villa in Mediterranean style. 2 floors, a terrace overlooking the sea, a swimming pool with turquoise water. "Voilà, monsieur." The driver stopped the car at the entrance. "Votre nouvelle maison." I was greeted on the porch. The manager, the maid, the cook, the gardener. I could afford it now. The villa was perfect. Spacious, bright rooms, minimalist design, expensive furniture. Everything was prepared for my arrival: fresh flowers in vases, a bottle of champagne in the refrigerator, clean linens. I walked around the house, studying every detail. A master bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows, a study with a library, a state-of-the-art kitchen, a terrace overlooking the sea. Stepping out onto the terrace, I took a deep breath of the salty air. The sun was setting, coloring the sky and the sea in shades of gold and purple. I sat down in the wicker chair and opened my laptop. The news from Boston was getting more and more interesting. Warren Slade has been arrested on suspicion of fraud and money laundering. FBI found evidence of bribes from Gulf Sierra. That's great. Even better than I planned. Missing Apex Capital millions. Trail leads to Switzerland. Authorities are requesting information from Swiss banks. They can ask all they want. Swiss banks are known for their confidentiality. And by the time anyone can get any information, the money will already be spread across dozens of accounts in different countries, invested in real estate, stocks, precious metals. Disappeared financier Lance Corey, criminal genius or victim of circumstance. Colleagues characterize him as a quiet, inconspicuous employee. I smiled. Inconspicuous, always in the shadows, always underappreciated. I closed my laptop and poured myself a glass of champagne from the fridge. It was getting evening. The lights of the yachts were beginning to twinkle on the horizon. For 12 years I'd been a shadow, a man used and discarded, ignored when he was needed and forgotten when he wasn't. That's all changed now. I've become what I was always meant to be, a man in control of his own destiny. I wonder what Meredith will say when she gets my letter. Will she understand? Would she judge me? It didn't matter anymore. The past was behind me. Lance Corey was gone. I took a sip of champagne and looked out at the sunset. The sun was touching the horizon, coloring the sea in shades of red and gold. New life, new opportunities, a new name. Nate Brannick looked out at the Mediterranean Sea and smiled. He had everything Lance Corey could ever dream of: money, freedom, opportunity, and he got it all by always staying in the shadows, watching, learning, waiting for his moment. I raised my glass in a silent toast to the new life that was just beginning.